Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about Zac, as that seems to be the champion that a lot of people have a pain point with recently, and the biggest champion that people are frustrated with following the tank rework. Now, Sejuani and Maokai both have their own detractors, and I will say, especially for Sejuani, they're not necessarily all wrong. However, they have not been nearly as outspoken as they have been about Zac, for the most part, and that's because Zac is just a really strong champion following his rework. He was initially reworked, people claimed he was underpowered, he got hotfix buffs, he got buffs in the next patch, and then people learned how to play him, and he was really strong, and he had a few nerfs, but unfortunately he is still quite strong at the end of the day. And I think this is partially Riot's fault. I don't think that this is a community perception thing as it was with Ivern when Ivern was first released. I think this was literally Riot buffed the champion that the community hadn't learned to play yet. And as it turns out, the champion was already good. We just had to wrap our mind around how to play the champion. And once we did, he was really strong. And then he had already been buffed and bad things happened. But that's neither here nor there. What I really wanted to talk about here is essentially why Zac is strong and what might be done to fix him. Because I think the biggest issue right now, and the biggest problem people have with Zac, is that he does have an absolute tidal wave of crowd control. However, I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing. Champions like Nautilus or Maokai also have a ton of crowd control that they can put all on one person and just kind of make them have a terrible day if they can land all their CC. I mean, Nautilus, if he's going after you and you exclusively, you don't get to play the game for a good 3 seconds or so. And it's the similar kind of thing with Zac. Now, the biggest thing with Zac is that his crowd control is AoE, so he can keep multiple members of the enemy team from doing anything, and that it's all fairly reliable CC. Nautilus has to land a hook, which is a large skill shot, but still a skill shot. His E only slows. He has to go through the long auto attack animation for his passive to proc. Generally speaking, Nautilus takes a long time to do things, and it's not very reliable, whereas Zac can quite easily Q a minion, which is easy to hit, and then auto attack a champion for the slam back, or has a large radius on his E that makes it easy to land, and has a large radius on his ultimate that makes it easy to land. You can see why there are problems with how Zac operates versus other tanks that make him quite strong. The other thing is that Zac has multiple ways of setting up a gank. I don't necessarily think this is a problem. Other champions have this as well. I'm a big fan of walking into a lane as Shinjao with red buff and not dashing. Just walk up and start auto-attacking, and the second they flash, then you use Audacious Charge to close the gap. And it's a similar thing with Zac, in that if he misses the E setup, he should have some kind of way to continue the gank going. However, I think that right now, Stretching Strikes is too reliable, and I also feel like the animation takes so long to complete and can pull you back such a far distance that it's a problem. Because Zac can essentially displace you about a quarter of a lane with just Stretching Strikes, and that is a very strong thing to have on top of the damage, on top of the slows. It's a lot for a single champion to have, especially if he misses his primary initiation. Now, I don't believe that the rework was intended to just straight up make Zac stronger, and realistically speaking, I don't think that Riot necessarily did the wrong thing in giving him the 2-part Stretching Strikes. It feels very Zac. I think it's a good thing for him to have. I think it's a lot more satisfying than his old Stretching Strikes, and it makes it so that Zac actually has more to think about during a fight as well, as opposed to slingshot in, bounce around with my ultimate, and then just kind of run around spamming random AoE damage abilities. And I know I touched on this a little bit before in my tank rework retrospective that I posted a couple of months ago when the rework first came out. But I wanted to reiterate it here. I think that the rework did a good job of solving Zac's problems, which weren't that he was underpowered or somehow bad. It was that he didn't feel satisfying to play. He did one thing and one thing only, which was get the initiation with Elastic Slingshot, and from there, he didn't do anything else. He didn't seem to require much skill. Stretching Strikes gives him the changes he needs to make sure he feels like a better champion to play. He's more fun to play, he requires more thought processes, and it means that he also has a higher skill ceiling. Newer players will likely not think of the fact that you can Q a minion and then auto-attack the champion for the knockback. They may always go for the champion first and then be disappointed when the skill shot gets flashed away from or otherwise avoided. So I think that the rework did a lot of good things. I think that Zac is too consistently reliable for him to exist in his current state, and I think there's also an argument that can be made for Zac possibly dealing too much damage. I know his damage was nerfed in a previous patch, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad thing for it to be nerfed again. So essentially, what am I saying should be changed? I think that Zac's kit as a whole is in a reasonable spot. I don't think that it needs to be changed outside of numbers changes. I do think that it gives Zac enough to think about in fights. It gives him a skill expression in his kit as opposed to going in and hitting every button. I think his W, though it is the most boring ability of his kit, needs to stay because it is it's a glue ability. Like with Brand's what his E, I can't remember the name of the ability now, but Brand's E effectively has to stay the same way that it was originally because it helps the rest of his kit function. Brand is very dependent on hitting 2 or more abilities in order to get the most out of his passive, and he can't really do that if he doesn't have a reliable way to hit an ability. And with Seer having a long travel time, not being the fastest skill shot, and with Pillar of Flame also having a long channel time, it means that Brand really does need some kind of ability he can reliably say, there, I got Blaze on you with, as opposed to always having to reach for an ability. And in a similar way, that's Zac's W. It gives him consistent damage, it gives him sustain in the jungle, it does what it needs him to do. Now, I will say that Riot could possibly remove the reduced cooldown every time he picks up a blob. I think that would be a reasonable buff that would, or nerf that would also hurt him in the jungle and would hurt his damage in team fights. Riot could also make it so that Stretching Strikes' range is not very long. I think that's the biggest pain point people have, and I addressed that a little bit, is reducing the distance on which Zac has to be standing next to the person he wanted to kill. That way, you have more of a chance of breaking the tether before Zac can actually hit something else, or at the very least of avoiding the skill shot entirely. Perhaps you could also make Stretching Strikes into a 2-part ability. Press to fire the first blob, press to fire the second blob, as opposed to auto-attacking. That way Zac has to have 2 targets he has to reliably hit, as opposed to just having to right-click one of them to get the other effect. I would also like to see Stretching Strikes' animation sped up a lot, which might lead to it looking weird and feeling weird, but I think that almost has to happen because right now the biggest problem I have is just how long it takes him to grab you and slam you into the other unit. It takes forever, and by the time you get out, you might already be dead. So I would love to see that change. It also might be interesting to see the E-nerf chain, or the E-buff reverted beforehand. It didn't knock out for quite as long, which meant that Zac was not as reliably able to get the Let's Bounce, and that might be a good place for Zac to be re-nerfed in order to give him a little bit more counterplay if he does manage to land the E. Anyways, those are just my thoughts on the subject. I'm sure you guys will have plenty if the old Rengar video is any indication. So go ahead and let me know down in the comment section below what you think about Zac, if you think he's balanced, unbalanced, and what you would do to change him. Especially if you're a Zac main, I would love to hear your guys' comments on it, as you probably know this champion better than I do. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. If you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I will talk to you all later.